Urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 1545? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Got that written down. The chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Thompson of Pennsylvania after 1:30 p.m. today.
Without objection, the request is granted. The gentleman will suspend. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Messer, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Now, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today for an important special order, this time to focus on Republican solutions to our national health care crisis. The President's health care law has hurt more people than it's helped. Taxes are going up, premiums are rising to unaffordable levels, workers' hours are being cut, and people are losing the plans they like. After more than $500 million spent, the website doesn't even work. The truth is that despite all these problems, the American people needed genuine health care reform before President Obama signed his signature law, and we still do. The American people deserve an alternative to the failures of the President's health care law. And we have one, the Affordable Health Care Reform Act. This important bill replaces the President's health care law with patient-centered reforms that genuinely lower costs while keeping you in charge of your health care. I have a few colleagues here with me today to join in this conversation, and certainly would like to start by recognizing Congressman Barton. Thank you for your leadership on this important issue.
Well, thank you, and I want to recognize your leadership in the Republican Study Committee and the Health Task Force on preparing the legislation that you've just referred to. I'm the past chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the past ranking member of that committee, and when the Affordable Care Act came through the Congress, I was the senior Republican on the Committee of Jurisdiction. And I don't want to tell you and the American people that I told you so, but I told you so. We knew that this wasn't going to work. Just for example, we had a hearing today about the Affordable Care Act in the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, and it was focusing on the security of the website and all the problems and when the administration knew about those problems and what they did or didn't do. But in the course of that hearing, Congressman Cory Gardner of Colorado was asking the senior civil servant, Mr. Chow from CMS, about some questions, and the gentleman from CMS just kind of off the cuff said, you know that 60 to 70% of the programs haven't been developed yet. 60 to 70%. And Congressman Gardner followed up and said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, all we're working on right now is the website to get people registered. We haven't done anything, or we haven't completed that portion of the program about billing, that portion about accounting for treatment, how we interact with the hospitals and the patients and the doctors. And basically 60 to 70% of the system has not been programmed yet. Now, can you imagine? Now, can you imagine if we're having the horrendous problems we're having on just getting people interactive with making choices of which kind of coverage they're going to choose, the problems you're going to have when you actually begin to have to use the system for real health care in January. And so I think you and the other members of the Republican Study Committee Task Force on Health that helped prepare the legislation that you're talking about, I think we're going to begin to push to delay the Affordable Care Act. I have a bill, H.R. 3348, that makes it voluntary the first year, that we're not going to impose the individual mandate on people. The President has already made the employer mandate, he's delayed that for a year, and my bill, H.R. 3348, would delay the individual mandate. So as we work through all the problems, people can choose to participate or choose not to participate. But I think it's becoming more apparent every day that the Affordable Care Act is like that shiny automobile that you go into the showroom or the car lot and you see it, and the salesman says, man, this thing is great. It gets 30 miles a gallon. It doesn't use much oil. Everything's power steering and air conditioning and a great stereo system. So you put your down payment and you take it out on the road, son of a gun. The thing doesn't go above 50. It burns oil like it's going out of style. Air conditioning doesn't work. Stereo system barely works. It's just a lemon. Well, the Affordable Care Act is a lemon, and the American people and the Democrats on the other side of the aisle that voted for it are having buyer remorse. So what we need to do is delay it or repeal it or at least make it voluntary, and then let's look at some of these alternatives like the legislation that we put into play where we give people real choices, where it's a patient-centered, client-centered system. We allow insurance to be sold across state lines. We beef up affordable savings accounts, health savings accounts. We do cover pre-existing conditions, and I know you'll talk about that later on, but we do it with a high-risk pool on a state-by-state basis. The Democrats have told us time after time in the general debate that you Republicans just are against the Affordable Care Act, but you don't have an alternative. Well, we have an alternative, and I think it's a good alternative. I'm a sponsor of the legislation, and I'm here to support you in this special order. And as we go through, outline what's in it, I think the American people, the other members of the House that are watching these proceedings, I think more and more of them will say, you know, we don't like that lemon that we have. Maybe we ought to go back. Maybe we ought to start over. And maybe some of these ideas in the alternative we should take a serious look at. So I commend you for your work on the legislation, and I also commend you for leading this special order this evening.
Thanks again. I appreciate the gentleman's leadership, your longstanding leadership on this important issue, your long-time leadership in Texas, as well. And as you've said, nobody wants to say I told you so, but unfortunately what's unfolded in the last most recent weeks and months is exactly what was predicted by folks in your committee and elsewhere, because you could see from the beginning that the bill was fundamentally flawed and just doesn't work. I want to cite to this chamber the number 701. That's the number of Hoosiers who have successfully signed up for health insurance on the Affordable Care Act exchanges, according to the Department of Health and Human Services. And Indiana isn't alone. States across the country are experiencing dismal enrollment numbers. What's worse, millions of Americans, including 108,000 Hoosiers, are getting policy cancellation notices from their health insurance companies. These notices are coming at a faster rate than people are able to sign up for the health care plans under the President's health care bill. The President called a press conference once again last week to announce to the American people that if you like your health care plan, you can keep it. The problem is, no matter how many times the President makes that promise, the promise still isn't true. Saying the promise over and over again doesn't magically make it true. One of my constituents, Michael Sturgis of Greensburg, called to let me know he received a cancellation letter from his insurance company. He was told his monthly premium was going to increase from $397 a month to $831 a month, an almost $500 increase per month. His $5,000 deductible will now go up to $7,300. So he's spending more money for a plan that gives him less. This is unacceptable, and it is certainly not affordable. That's why we need to pass the American Health Care Reform Act, so people like Michael and the millions of Americans like him all across this country can remain in charge of their own health care. And now I would like to recognize a colleague of mine, another person who's shown great leadership on this important issue, and just a close personal friend of mine as well, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and I think more importantly his heart on representing the people of the great state of Indiana and the fact that he is concerned on a daily basis. We've had conversations a number of times on just not only how this health care law is affecting families, but truly how we must find a way to work together in a bipartisan way to stop the harmful effects on those men and women that we call neighbors, friends, and constituents. So I thank the gentleman for yielding. And, you know, Americans across the country are already feeling the impacts of Obamacare. And many of them are fearful of what lies ahead. And I know in my state alone we've had over 473,000 people that have lost their health care coverage due to cancellations because of Obamacare. And, you know, they keep asking, you know, well, what's coming next? What's the next thing? You know, whether it's a website that doesn't work, whether it's cancellation policies, whether it's security concerns over the website that's existing, they're all concerned. I held a town hall meeting last night, and 85% of the callers and questions were all related to Obamacare. I don't think we've ever seen it so overwhelmingly lopsided in terms of one issue. And yet it was all about families. And for me, it was the families of Western North Carolina. I had veterans asking me, well, does this mean that I'm going to lose my health care coverage? Is TRICARE going to be sucked into the Obamacare? And even though we've had promises to the contrary, we know that there's a real move afoot to minimize and bring it down. And so our commitment to our veterans is one that has to stay strong, and we have to be committed to that. And I know that you agree with me on that particular issue. You know, there was a wife who was worried about how she and her husband were going to be able to afford the premiums because their premiums had tripled. And they said, you know, we just don't know how we're going to be able to afford it. And then I had a business owner who employs, you know, he said between 26 and 28 people. He employs, though, he says, I'm not sure how we're going to continue to be able to provide health care coverage as premiums escalate, and it's all about trying to make sure that I keep them gainfully employed, and now I'm having to try to figure out how we pay for these premiums that have increased. And so these are real people. This is not politics. They have faces and names, and we've got to address it. You know, people across the country have become gravely concerned, and a recent poll showed more than 58% of the people believe that Obamacare is not ready for prime time. And despite this overwhelming stress over Obamacare, you know, the one question I continue to hear is, well, what's your solution? You know, many of the Democrats have claimed that Republicans only want to repeal the law rather than trying to fix it. But I can tell you that that's not the case, because even in this Congress, Republicans have offered over 102 bills to fix some of the problems with the Affordable Care Act, while the Democrats have only offered 17 solutions. Now, last week we passed one of those solutions, the Keep Your Health Plan Act, you know, to make sure that if you like your health care plan, that you can keep it. But much more needs to be done. The America Health Care Reform Act that you were talking about now has over 102 co-sponsors. It's a comprehensive solution that's put forth by House Republicans to address the serious problems that we have in our nation's health care system. You know, it's a multifaceted piece of legislation that provides an array of reforms and lower costs. You know, something that the current bill really doesn't do. You know, we talk about affordable care, but it hasn't really been lowering the cost. But this is one that keeps it patient-centered, allows to make sure that a doctor's, you know, that health care is a decision between a doctor and a patient, not the government and the patient. And so it provides those tax reforms for families and companies, and it levels the playing field for providing for health care for all Americans. You know, fully repeals the President's health care law, eliminates billions in taxes, you know, thousands of pages of unworkable regulations and mandates that we've already seen that we're only now starting to find out what the implications are. It spurs competition, you know, to lower health care costs. We know that competition will do that. And yet it allows for the purchase of health insurance across state lines, enabling businesses to kind of pool together, small businesses, to lower those health care costs. But it's really about reforming what we're seeing. It reforms medical malpractice laws in a common sense way that limits trial lawyers' fees, but yet at the same time does not diminish the protection for our patients if something were to go wrong. You know, it expands health savings accounts, something that increases the ability for pre-tax dollars to make sure that what they can do is use those dollars to provide for their health care expenses. You know, ultimately, it's a safeguard. It safeguards us against those pre-existing conditions. I know you've heard from your constituents and mine that one of the good things about the Affordable Care Act is it makes sure those pre-existing conditions are covered. This does the same thing and makes sure that they're protected, with yet at the same time making sure that those high-risk pools are extended and guaranteed that availability, the protection that many of Americans depend on and need. You know, I just want to thank your leadership on this particular issue. I believe it's time we work together in a bipartisan way to fix this problem piece of legislation. We put forth a proposal. I urge my colleagues across the aisle to join us, and I thank you for your leadership in highlighting this evening, and I yield back.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate the gentleman and his leadership. I'm sure you've been asked by many, both privately and publicly, the same thing I've been asked, which is, well, aren't you really just rooting for Obamacare to fail? And the comment I make every time I'm asked that question is, no, I'm rooting for the millions of Americans who are now being harmed by this bill. All the moms and dads that are worried about whether they're going to have insurance that had it before. The people that were promised things that they would suddenly magically have insurance, and now they're not getting it. And the areas across the country where there were promises that rates would go down, and now rates are going up, those folks now, they're caught in this plan. And I do think we have a responsibility. You and I both know, anybody that's been following here, we were opposed to Obamacare and led efforts, along with many others, to try to make sure that we didn't have it. But we also have always recognized that the status quo wasn't acceptable in health care either, that while we had a lot of great things in our system, you know, certainly some of the best health care treatment in the world, we had a program that was unaffordable and rates were going up. We have free enterprise-based, patient-centered based solutions that can make a difference, and appreciate your leadership in highlighting
well,
that.
you know, you're absolutely right, and I know that I've got physicians in North Carolina that are looking at retiring because of dealing with the bureaucracy of this new law. We've got hospitals who thought it was going to be a great advantage to them in covering those costs that are now looking and saying, well, the implementation of it is really what we were promised, and what we're getting may not be exactly the same. And so we need to make sure that we right this ship, that we do what's right. I'm honored to be able to co-sponsor this legislation with you, and look forward to your leadership, and I thank you.
Thanks again. Thank you very much. For months, the President has unilaterally enacted modifications, repeals, and delays to his own law. Yet none of those so-called fixes have fixed this flawed law. Health care costs have continued to skyrocket. This is a huge burden on employers, individuals, and families. The American Health Care Reform Act will drive down the cost of health care through increased competition. Individuals will be able to purchase health insurance across state lines, and as my colleague highlighted, businesses can pool together to get the same buying power as large corporations. Under the American Health Care Reform Act, families will have the flexibility to pick the coverage that best fits their needs. When people are in charge of their own health care, they become better consumers, which will encourage competition in the health care market. Real savings will only happen when people, not Washington bureaucrats, are in charge of their own health care. And next up, I'd like to highlight a real leader on this important issue of providing an alternative to the failed programs of the President's health care law. My friend and colleague from Louisiana, the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, Mr. Scalise. Great to have you here.
Well, I want to thank my friend and colleague, Mr. Messer from Indiana, for yielding and for your leadership and talking about this here on the House floor. You know, I think a lot of us over the last few years that this law has been on the books, while we've been pointing out all of the many problems that it's creating for families, and we predicted, unfortunately, we saw this coming. This train wreck, as it was called by the lead sponsor in the Senate, who rammed the bill through, called it a train wreck recently because he finally acknowledged how devastating this would be. And, of course, the President, we all remember that promise that was repeated time and time again. If you like what you have, you can keep it. Something we all embrace. Of course, I knew, you knew, so many of us knew. I think even the President knew, unfortunately, when he was making that promise time and time again for the last 3 years, that promise could not be kept under the President's health care law. Just with all the mandates, all the unworkable taxes and mandates, and these government bureaucrats that come between patients and doctors and get in the middle of health care, and IRS agents coming with the hammer to enforce this law. We all knew, we saw that there would be no way people would be able to keep the health care that they liked, and while we repeated it many times, it wasn't real until recently. When millions of families started getting cancellation notices, losing the good health care that they have today and enjoy. I know I've gotten letters from so many of my constituents. We reached out through social media with Facebook and Twitter, share with Steve and ask for their stories. And I remember Sean from Covington who said, I'm losing the good health care I have. And I posed the question to Secretary Sebelius at a hearing. I said, you know, here's a guy in my district, we're hearing this over and over again. He's losing his health care. What do you tell him? And she said, oh, just go in the marketplace. Of course, this is the website that doesn't work. That he spent over $500 million of taxpayer money. Not one person's been held accountable, by the way, for that failure. And so as we point out all these failures, we also said there's a better way. And we as conservatives stepped forward and said, we ought to put down on paper the things we stand for, market-driven, consumer, patient-oriented health care reforms that actually lower costs, that will actually increase access. And we put it together in a bill called the American Health Care Reform Act, H.R. 3121, a bill anybody can go look up and read. In fact, a bill that's less than 200 pages long with all the great reforms in it. And, of course, comparing and contrasting that to the President's health care law with over 2,700 pages, all these unworkable mandates. And so what the bill does is just basic common sense reforms that should have been done years ago. We, of course, as you mentioned, allow people to buy across state lines. People are, in America, probably some of the best consumers in the world. With the Internet, with so many options, people go online every day and find good products for their family, and they don't care where that product is from. If it's good for their family, they're going to buy it. And yet with health care, you really can't do that. You don't really have that opportunity. And so the health care law has taken those options away from families. And so what we say is, let's empower people again. Let's put patients back in charge of their health care decisions. And if I'm from Louisiana, if I find a better deal for my family in the state of Maryland, I can go buy that plan. I should be able to buy that plan. Right now, I really can't. Yet you do that with car insurance and so many other products. You're able to buy across state lines, and it gives you opportunities. We do so many other things to make sure people with pre-existing conditions can't be discriminated against, allowing small businesses to pull together. But again, this is a bill that's been put together by conservatives in the House. In fact, a number of medical doctors, actual medical doctors, people with real-world experience in health care that helped draft this bill. And ultimately, we brought it forward, and we have over 100 co-sponsors. So I think the momentum's building as the President's law just continues to collapse. And frankly, the President's credibility collapses with it. People, I think, are now looking for that better way, and we have it with the American Health Care Reform Act. Again, thank the gentleman for Indiana for his leadership, and I go back.
I certainly appreciate the gentleman from Louisiana and his leadership. I know you were quoted over the weekend on Fox News by George Will describing the tragic circumstances that most Americans see themselves in, those that have lost their health care plan. And so I'd like you to expand on that just a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure, one of the things we've heard so much from this administration about health care is they've referred to people's plans that had good plans. They refer to many of them as lousy plans. I've been in hearings where we've had Obama administration officials, in fact, the President himself, goes around chastising people and saying, yeah, you might be losing your plan, but it probably wasn't that good of a plan anyway. Who is it for some Washington politician to tell somebody in Covington, Louisiana, as a constituent of mine, Sean said, who is it for the President to say that Sean's plan was lousy when Sean liked his plan? The President's promise was not, if Barack Obama likes what you have, you can keep it. The promise was, if you like what you have, you can keep it. And no Washington politician or bureaucrat or IRS agent should be able to take that away from you. And yet, as that was happening, and they're berating people and saying, your plan wasn't that good, it was a lousy plan, I said, it's kind of like a guy who burns down your house and then he shows up with an empty bucket of water and then he sits there and gives you a lecture on how bad and lousy your house was before the fire. All you want is your house back. And you didn't want somebody to burn it down in the first place. People just want their good health care. And they sure don't want to be lectured by some bureaucrat or politician in Washington saying, hey, your plan really wasn't that good because I don't think it was that good, when in fact the person back home is saying, I thought it was good. It was good for my family. My doctor can go see my kids, and I want to continue that relationship with my doctor, and they're about to lose it. And they're losing it with these Washington politicians who helped ram this bill through. And that's why I think as the President's health care law collapses on all the weight of these unworkable mandates and taxes, we need to put up an alternative, and we have an alternative called A Better Way, the American Health Care Reform Act. And so we want to help bail those people out with a real bucket of water and a real relief sign that there is something that we're doing, not only to point out how bad the law is, they're seeing it play out every day, but also how we can actually fix the problems that are becoming even worse because of this law.
Well, again, I think the gentleman, thank your leadership. And, as we've talked about before, the American people needed health care reform before the disaster of Obamacare rolled out. Obviously, we need it now more than ever, given the failings of recent days. And H.R. 3121, the American Health Care Reform Act, is an answer. There are several principles upon which we should all be able to agree when it comes to genuine health care reform. First, patients should not be denied health insurance because of pre-existing conditions. Second, any federal policy changes must be designed to drive costs down, not up, as we've seen under the the so-called Affordable Care Act. Third, you should be able to keep your health care plan if you like it. And I agree with former President Bill Clinton when he has said that given that very clear promise that was made by President Obama on behalf of the federal government to the American people, we need to pass legislation. We've already passed a bill in the House, but we need to pass legislation that makes sure that promise is kept. Fourth, if we need, or we do need, common sense medical liability reform that puts an end to the expensive system of defensive medicine that we have now. Health care decisions should be left up to you and your doctor, not Washington bureaucrats. The American Health Care Reform Act is centered on these 5 principles. Frivolous lawsuits are driving up health care costs and forcing good doctors out of the medical field. The American Health Care Reform Act improves medical liability law. Frankly, Indiana has been a leader in this area because of leadership from former Governor Doc Bowen, a physician back in the 1960s. The Indiana medical malpractice reform approach would be a great federal model, and its principles from that plan are as a part of H.R. 3121, which we're talking about today. We need improved medical liability law that allows doctors to continue practicing medicine without fear of excessive and unfair penalties. Also, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the importance of medical savings accounts. Fellow Hoosier Pat Rooney is known as the father of health savings accounts from his work as the president and CEO of Golden Rule. They were established in 2003 while Pat Rooney was the chairman of the Golden Rule Insurance Company. Pat believed people should own their own health care. Health savings accounts have proven to be a useful tool for individuals and families while navigating the health care system. Our plan, H.R. 3121, expands health saving accounts and enhances their performance by increasing the cap on contributions and expanding the allowable uses of health savings account funds. This gives people more control over how they spend their health care dollars and allows them to invest pre-tax dollars toward their future health care needs. Mr. Speaker, no one doubts that real reform is needed, but there are 2 distinct visions for the future of health care in our nation. The President's plan expands the federal government's role in health care, raises taxes, and imposes unfair and unworkable mandates on the American people. Our plan, H.R. 3121, the American Health Care Reform Act, puts people in charge of their own health care. It encourages competition to lower costs and expand coverage. American families, businesses, and individuals deserve real solutions to the very serious problems that exist in health care in America today. The American Health Care Reform Act provides a path to true reform. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, please.
Without objection.
Thank you, Rick, for doing that. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about the devastating tornado that hit my region of Illinois this past Sunday. The tornado, which has been classified as an EF4, hit speeds of up to 190 miles an hour. The city of Pekin in my district was hit especially hard. More than 200 structures in the city of 35,000 people were damaged and 75 homes were left uninhabitable. Many people lost not only their homes, but their possessions. To give just one personal story, Gary and Selena Clear were in church on Sunday when the tornado hit. They took shelter with the rest of the congregation in the hallway. Finally, when they were able to drive safely back home, they didn't even recognize their house. Much of their roof was gone, their garage had been torn away, and their battered car lay amid rubble. Illinoisans are generous and compassionate people, as well as being resilient and hardworking. I have no doubt that we will recover from this storm. But this type of disaster could happen anywhere. As we continue to debate the issues of the day, I call on all of us to keep in mind the people who have been hit hard by natural disasters. We owe it to them to be there for them in their time of need. Thank you, and Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for this opportunity. Usually, at least once a week, we come before the House to talk about jobs, that little four-letter word that is so important on everybody's mind. Can I get a job? Will I have a job? What's it take to get a job in America? We still have far too high unemployment, and we still have a great need to make sure that our jobs produce the kind of wages and opportunities that Americans really want. They want to be able to buy a home, to have a car, raise their family, provide the necessities, see that their kids get a great education and opportunity. We've got a long way to go. We've come a long way, but we still have a ways to go. One of the critical ways in which America can and must build jobs is to build the infrastructure, to make sure that those foundations upon which the economy will grow, upon which cities will be built, those things that allow us to prosper. The critical investments, in this case the physical investments, are the issue we're going to talk about today. We have an opportunity. Beginning tomorrow, a conference committee will be formed here in the Capitol, made up of senators, Republican and Democrat, and members of the House of Representatives, both Republican and Democrat, sitting down together, together, actually, at the same table, tomorrow morning, 9:30, to begin a conference committee on the Water Resource Development Act, otherwise known as WRDA. If you're around here long enough, you know what that means, but I guess the rest of the world really needs to know that it's the Water Resource Reform Development Act. And so, 13 million jobs. 13 million jobs in America depend upon how well that conference committee does its work. House of Representatives a few weeks back put out its version of the bill. The Senate did several months ago. Senator Barbara Boxer from the state of California, my colleague, will be chairing that committee. And we have work to do. We have the task of making sure that 13 million American jobs that depend upon the Water Resource Reform and Development Act will be secure. It's a big one. So what's involved in the Water Resource Development Act? Well, how about this? 99% of America's international trade travels through our ports and waterways. That's a big number. I suppose there's some 1% that travels on airplanes, and those are probably very high-ticket, high-priced items. But if you're talking about the great, almost the entire majority of America's work goes through our ports and waterways. This is what Water Resource Reform and Development Act is all about. It's about our ports, the great ports of America. It's about the waterways of America. It's about the locks and the dams on the rivers. Let me put this up for just a second. An interesting map. I don't know if many Americans have really considered the map of the United States and the waters of the United States. Obviously, the coastline. We don't have Alaska on this map, but it should be there also. The Great Coast, the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, the Pacific Coast, and of course on and around Alaska. But that's not all. Each of these rivers also is a waterway upon which commerce flows. And tomorrow, with the conference committee, the Wood bill, we will be discussing how to make these rivers more attuned to the environment and to commerce. On the great Mississippi River, the Missouri, the Ohio and the Illinois River, and all the way up into Wisconsin, an enormous amount of America's commerce flows along those rivers. And joining me in just a few moments will be Representative Bill Enyard from the state of Illinois, and he'll be talking about some of these issues as they relate to that part of the world. But this great river system in the central part of America is the highway, the major highway of America. Oh, there are interstate roads, to be sure, and there are local and county roads, but most of them feed into this great system that moves up and down the Mississippi River. The Water Resource Development Act is all about that. It's all about that commerce on that great river and about whether the locks and the levees that are on that river are adequate to meet the needs of commerce and the needs of public protection. For those of us on the West Coast and the East Coast and even into the Gulf, it's about the ports. It's about the ports of America and whether those ports are adequate for the commerce that we need to have. And so when you happen to go by a port and you see one of these tied up at the dock, you can think about the American economy and about 99% of the international trade that goes in and out of our ports. It's a big deal. It is a very, very big deal. And most of America's ports are antiquated. They are the shoals, that is the mud and sand at the bottom of the ports has been accreted, that is built up over the last several years, and it needs constant dredging. And so part of what we'll be dealing with at the WRDA Conference Committee is the dredging of the ports and quite possibly the shore side, what's going on there. These are subjects that we'll come to in the next few minutes as we talk more about how we can build jobs in America and simultaneously build the American economy by building the great infrastructure. One more issue I want to put up here before I call on Mr. Enyard is this one. You see all those rivers there? They're critically important. They're critically important for commerce and trade and obviously water and agriculture and all the rest. But sometimes, virtually every year, they're also a major problem for America. This happens to be a picture of a levee break on the Sacramento River system, which I happen to represent, 200 miles of the Sacramento River. This break is all too common across America. And so the Water Resource Development Act, which will be up tomorrow in the conference committee, not going to be finished, but at least it'll make some progress towards completion, will deal with the levees. The Army Corps of Engineers is the responsible federal agency for the maintenance of the rivers, for the waters of America, whether they are in the rivers or along the shore. They're responsible for the ports, that is for the maintenance of the ports, not the ports themselves. And in my district, the Army Corps of Engineers plays a major role in public safety because it's their responsibility to make sure these levees are adequate to the challenge of the flood. And when those levees are not adequate, great damage is done across America. It's probably about $22.3 billion of annual unspent American treasure that is still in the pockets of America and the governments of America when these levees work. When they fail, a huge expense, floods, flood damage, and the like. I'd like now to call on my colleague, Mr. Enyard from Illinois, to share with us his view of the necessity for the Water Resource Reform Development Act and the way in which it protects and helps his district. So, Mr. Enyard, if you'll come up and join us.
I thank the gentleman from California for this time to speak about the importance of the Water Resources Development Act. You know, Mr. Garamundi was talking about the coast, the East Coast and the West Coast and the great coastlines of our nation. And I always like to tell folks out here that I represent the West Coast of Illinois. And I always get a strange look when I say that, and sometimes a chuckle, but I represent the westernmost counties of Illinois, the river counties, reaching from Alton, Illinois, just north of St. Louis, all the way to Cairo, the very southern tip of Illinois. And that piece of Illinois encompasses the great maritime highway that's the economic backbone of our inland agriculture industry, indeed all of our inland industries. Just north of my district, the Illinois River, which transits from the Mississippi up to the Great Lakes, flows into the Mississippi. Directly across from my district, the Missouri River feeds into the Mississippi. And then as you go downstream, the Mississippi and the Ohio converge at the very southern tip at Cairo, Illinois. So we understand in southern Illinois the importance of these river systems. We understand the importance of port authorities. Port authorities aren't just limited to Los Angeles and New York and the East and the West Coast or the Gulf Coast, but they're very important to our inland maritime industry also. Back when I served as the Adjutant General or the Commanding General for the Illinois National Guard, I had the unfortunate problem of dealing with floods on the Mississippi and on the Ohio. And back when I was a young officer, we had the terrible flood of '93, we had the flood of '08, and then the flood of '11. And then just last winter, we had the terrible drought that wound up dropping the river levels in the Mississippi so low that it nearly stopped navigation on the river. And so we need to work on this infrastructure for the three reasons that I ran for Congress. When I ran for Congress, I said I ran for jobs, jobs, and jobs. And that's what this is about. You know, when the river started drying up, when that drought hit, and those barges couldn't transit the Mississippi, and we're having to go up and down the Mississippi with much lighter loads, it did several things to impact our economy. First of all, the barges couldn't transport nearly as much corn or as much soybeans. And at one point, the world's corn supply was down to less than 30 days. 30 days for the entire world. The world needed that corn from Illinois and from Iowa and the Dakotas and Missouri. That corn gets shipped on the Mississippi River and the Missouri River. And when that river was drying up, that corn didn't flow. And coming upstream is the oil that goes into the refineries at Wood River, Illinois, the steel that gets processed at the steel mills in Alton, Illinois, and Granite City, Illinois, and the fertilizer that goes on the fields throughout southern and central Illinois. There are several provisions in this bill that have passed through the Senate that we think need to be added to the House bill that would help those navigation requirements on the Mississippi River. Additionally, we have provisions in the bill that, as Mr. Garamundi talked about, would improve the levee system. The levee system is critical not only throughout my district, but indeed up and down the rivers because of the problems with flood insurance. I have families who've lived for generations in homes located near the Mississippi River and other contributory rivers who, because of the potential rise in flood insurance rates, will be unable to afford to pay the insurance and unable to sell their homes to relocate as necessary. So we need to improve those levees. And by the way, while we're improving those levees, what are we doing? Putting people to work. This bill is supported by multiple groups throughout our nation, and it is truly a bipartisan bill. It passed the House 417-3 and the Senate by a vote of 83-14. You can't get much more bipartisan than that. So, and when we look at the supporters of this bill, labor supports the bill because they understand the importance of these jobs and they understand the importance of maritime industry along that river. Excuse me, the Chamber of Commerce supports that bill. The National Association of Manufacturers, the American Farm Bureau, the Illinois Farm Bureau, all support this bill because it's important to all of those industries, to all of those jobs. And it's not just the local economy of Southern Illinois. It's the regional economy, the national economy, indeed even the world economy. Remember what I was talking about when the world's corn supply was down to less than 30 days. If we can't ship corn from Illinois and Iowa and the Midwest out to the world, we have a very serious food problem. The bill provides provisions for the Corps of Engineers to maintain navigation on the river, to improve the navigation aids that were virtually useless during the drought. Some of those navigation aids are simply lines painted on bridges. You know, those are navigation aids that date back to the 19th century, back to Mark Twain. And today, I think we could do a little bit better than painting lines on bridge abutments to provide navigation aids for our maritime industry. Additionally, the Corps at this point is restricted to working in the 300-foot congressionally mandated channels. So 300 feet going down the river that the barges transit through is the only place the Corps is allowed to work. This bill would give the Corps more authorities to work outside that channel to ensure that we have safe navigation for those barges filled with oil and with fertilizer and other industrial materials. The bill would also provide for a greater Mississippi River Basin extreme weather management study. Today, we don't understand how the river system operates, and we don't treat it as a system. When you look at that map that Mr. Garamundi showed you of the river system, you see an entire system. You see the Mississippi, the Ohio, the Missouri, the Illinois. Those aren't separate entities. But today in the law, we treat them as separate entities. The Missouri River is governed under completely different legislation than the Mississippi River is. And the Corps of Engineers, even if everybody agreed, couldn't release water from those Missouri River dams down into the Mississippi River to help the navigation because they didn't have the authorities to do so. Now, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think we need a common sense solution to that. We treat the entire system as it is indeed a system. Another issue that we need to consider are the locks and dams. Many of those locks and dams are 70 years old. They're in need of maintenance. They're in need of improvement. Those locks and dams, many of them are only 600 feet, and for efficiencies, they need to be 1,200 feet in order to get the barge tows through. That'll do several things. It will help the economy by lessening shipping costs, by making it making the cost of transportation for that corn, for that fertilizer, for that oil that gets refined into gasoline, dropping those transportation costs, making it less expensive to process and to buy. It would also be good for the environment, because by using bigger tows, you're burning less fuel to ship the same amount of goods. And shipping by barge in the inland waterways is by far the most fuel-efficient method of transportation compared to either rail or trucking. So clearly, for all of those reasons, we need to get this bill passed. We need it for, remember my three issues, jobs, jobs, and jobs. For Southern Illinois, for the region, for the nation. I yield back to the gentleman from California.
Thank you very much. Sometimes I want to call you Congressman. Sometimes I want to call you General. But always we want to say that you really know the Mississippi. You've served there in the National Guard, providing the protection to the people, and to have a very good sense of what's necessary in that part of Illinois and beyond. As you were talking about the issues of moving goods and services up and down the great Mississippi River system, Ohio, Missouri, and the other rivers, there's about $1.4 trillion of goods that move down that river into the other ports across America and shipped out across the entire world. 30 million jobs. You were talking about that. You also raised a point that is very, very important, and that is it's not just the ongoing jobs of the tugboats and the barges, the granaries, and all of that, but it's also the job of building the infrastructure itself. The men and women that are going to get out there and put together the new docks, the new levee systems. All of those things require manpower, and we know that there's an enormous benefit. Every dollar that's invested in infrastructure returns well over $3 back into the economy immediately, to say nothing of the long-term benefit that comes of having that new lock system in place, more efficient, longer locks, so as you said, more of those barges in just one tow line can work their way through the lock and not have to be broken up into smaller tow lines. So a lot of issues in this piece of legislation. It's going to be an extremely important moment in moving the economy forward. And this is the first time in 6 years. It's been 6 years since the Congress and the Senate got together to do a water resource development, reform and development program. Why? Well, I guess we just couldn't quite figure it out. But we have to do it this time. There's a need for very, very serious reform in this system. We know that many of the projects that are undertaken, that the Corps of Engineers are working on, are forever trying to get in line and get in place. We know that many projects simply are derelict. They never should be built. And so the bill removes $12 billion of derelict projects that should never be built and replaces them with new projects that are critically important. Some of those are the locks along the Mississippi and Ohio system and some of the other dams that are out there. For me in California, we know that these projects are critically important. The city of Sacramento, Mr. Annual, is one of the most flood risk cities. In fact, it's number 2 in flood risk, probably number 1 now that New Orleans has had an opportunity to have its flood walls rebuilt following the devastation of Katrina. But now it's Sacramento, a huge population in a very, very risky area, a population that I represent part of and share with Congresswoman Matsui, the city of Sacramento. A little different than New Orleans. When Katrina came through, it was flood, to be sure, and terribly damaging. Many, many lives were lost, but the water was warm. In Sacramento, if the levees were to break on the American or the Sacramento River system and flood that system, we're talking about very, very cold water, water that people would not survive in for more than a few minutes because of the temperature and hypothermia. And so we really need to build those levees, and as I go into this task of being on the conference committee, where I will serve as one of the representatives of the House of Representatives, I will be looking at those kinds of projects that are really human life, the safety of my constituents and the safety of constituents all around this nation, where these levees need to be built to a high standard. Many of them need to be prepared. In my district, the Delta of California, many of the levees are over 100 years old and were never built to standards that would be applicable today. And so we have work to do. We have levees to build. We have ports to build. We have channels to dredge. We have jobs that will be created when we pass this bill and adequately fund it. One other thing that's possible here is not only will we create jobs directly in building the ports, dredging the rivers and channels, building the levees and repairing them. Those are direct jobs. Not only will we do that, we'll also have the long-term foundation, the investment necessary for future economic growth. We will also, if we do one more thing, and I hope to get this into the legislation, and that is make sure that there is a strong Buy America provision. This is going to be American taxpayer money that's going to be used for the steel in the locks, for the cement, for the pilings in the piers, and probably the dredges that will be used for the channel. This is all American taxpayer money that will be used to buy and to maintain that equipment. If it's American taxpayer money, then by golly, you ought to be buying American goods. So buy America. Use our taxpayer money to build the rest of the manufacturing sector of America. Build our steel industry by buying America steel for the locks and for the piers and for the cement and for the other work that's to be done. Make it in America. Very simple. Use American taxpayer money to make it in America and to buy American goods. And so I'm going to be working very diligently on that conference committee to make sure that this Buy America provision is strongly embedded in the legislation. And I know that if we are able to do that, we'll not only improve our levees, dredge the channels, build the ports, but we will also have the opportunity to make American jobs in the manufacturing sector. Mr. Aynard, you may have some thoughts about this or additional thoughts that you'd like to bring to our attention. If so, please have at it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Garamendi. Actually, I do. And I'd like to point out that the Democratic motion to instruct conferees, as you pointed out, you serve on that conference committee, passed on November 14th with bipartisan support.